To today's session on DevOps and introduction to DevOps. So today we'll be talking more all about what exactly is DevOps and how can you get started with DevOps and why DevOps is so important in the entire software development industry and in general, and how it's becoming one of the fastest growing job roles today. And especially even if you're a fresher or if even if you're studying in college right now, you can get internships and job opportunities as a fresher in the entire sector of DevOps. And we'll also be announcing a DevOps course that, or basically a number of DevOps videos and tutorials that we'll be releasing on this YouTube channel for this Discord community, for the Scalar Discord community. So stay tuned, and we'll also be taking up some questions towards the end. We'll also be sharing what are some of the resources, how can you get started, what's the roadmap for getting into DevOps, and finally we'll also share some resources that will be beneficial in case you are interested to basically get into DevOps. Now, of course, before we speak about anything related to DevOps and how to get started with it, for those folks who might be interested in what exactly is DevOps, so I'll start by presenting my screen. So give me 1 second. Let me start sharing my screen. All right. Uh, my screen should be visible now. So, of course, today we are going to be covering like what exactly is DevOps and why was there a need for DevOps to come, right? So, before we define DevOps, let's just take a few moments and a few minutes to just understand that how did our software development process actually work before, DevOps actually became a concept and became widespread to be used as the de facto standard as part of the software development lifecycle. So we'll just talk a bit about that, and then we'll cover the life cycle and the entire roadmap and how basically you can get started with DevOps. So if we just talk about primarily like what is the historical, like how software development used to be done before DevOps actually came. So you may or may not have come across the terminology of the waterfall model. So the waterfall model was a simple model that we used in the software development life cycle, which we also call as the SDLC, where we used to first gather the requirements for our software. Then we used to create a design. We used to start the development of the model of that particular of that particular software, and then we used to test it, we used to deploy it, and we used to maintain it. So basically, it was a it was a very linear system that once you have basically done the development and you have moved on to testing and you have moved on to actually deploying your software so that it can be used by the public, it was very difficult to actually make any changes to any of these particular phases of this waterfall model. So let's say that during the testing or during the deployment, you realize that you probably have missed out a very important feature during the development process. So it was not a very straightforward thing to be able to just move back to the development process and then come back to the deployment. So it was a very linear process that you started with the requirements and finally went into the maintenance. So that was one of the biggest issues that was there. That once, let's say that the development team was basically using an environment, then let's say once your development team has done their development and it goes to the testing and to the deployment teams, they were primarily just working inside of the same environment, right? So if let's say during the time of the deployment and testing, if there was any bug that might have come up, right, if there was any bug that might have been detected, then the development team of course will go ahead and will have to first fix it. And that operation side of things, where we are finding out bugs and reporting them back to the development team and resolution of the bugs and all, that is not a very streamlined process, as you might probably imagine. So in case you have already studied about the waterfall model, then you might be aware of such a thing. And also, if we just take a look at how these applications were basically run and deployed. So historically, we used to basically run a single application on a single machine, which is also called as like a server, and there is no ability to be able to actually run multiple applications on a single machine. So let's say if you were to like run multiple applications on multiple machines, you'll require more amount of resources that would lead to more amount of time that would be involved in actually running these resources. The cost involved in having to basically set up and maintain more number of computers to just be able to run. So let's say if you were to scale up your application, initially if it's serving to 100 people and now it was to be served to 1,000 people, then that would like increase the time, the effort, and also the money, the cost of maintaining so many number of machines. And that basically led to the introduction of virtual machines, which basically are able to help run your applications in a remote server, so you don't need to have dedicated on premise storage or on premise computers to be able to run your applications. Those could be done with the help of a machine that was kept somewhere else, and you can basically be able to interact with it with the help of cloud computing. So with DevOps, you'll also hear cloud computing also quite a lot. So we'll be covering all of that today. So that's a bit of the historical idea of how basically we started with this waterfall model, and then after waterfall model we also had another very famous process or methodology in software development, known as the agile methodology, where we are basically repeating the continuous repetition of the development of during the software development life cycle, and then also testing. So basically this as compared to the waterfall model, the sprints, since like agile methodologies are all about sprints, so the development testing is very quick, and you have dedicated sessions where you are having both your development and testing. So basically both your development and testing are concurrent, and that basically leads us to what exactly is DevOps. So after seeing all of these all of these issues that we saw with the waterfall model, with the agile model, that led to the introduction of DevOps. So what exactly is DevOps primarily? So the biggest issue when it came the biggest issue when it came to understand what is the because there was definitely a lack of understanding between, or lack of collaboration between, the developers who were working on the software development itself, like they were developing the software. And then there were these operation engineers who were primarily focused, or whose focus was to basically go ahead and release the software. So software developers were primarily focused on how shall we create a software, and the operation engineers were that okay, this software has been created, now how shall we distribute the software and how to maintain the software. So there was a lack of collaboration between the developers and the operation engineers, which basically slowed down the development process and the release process. So in order to increase the collaboration between the developers and the operational engineers, that basically led to the birth of DevOps approach. So DevOps is primarily aimed to help the collaboration between the development and the operation side of the entire software development lifecycle. So that is why it's basically made up of two different words, which is development and operations, right? So it's basically a set of practices and a number of different tools, both open source tools and proprietary tools, that help organizations to build their products faster, because of the better communication and better integration between the development and the operations functions. And when we basically talk about operations, let's basically break it down into what exactly does that mean, right? So basically this is the entire DevOps life cycle, right? So of course with development, we are following the same pattern, which is whenever we discuss about developing a software, we are talking about the requirement gathering, like what should be the requirements. So that basically comes under the planning of your software. Then basically you start to actually create your software. That's the actual software development process. This will also involve the the design aspects, so design plus development. And then basically what we'll so this is part of the development life cycle, right? From the development part. Now, when it comes to the operations, right? So once you have basically gone ahead and developed some software, you need to test it, you need to release it, right? And you might have to basically configure that particular software based on what particular end user or what is the end environment in which you're basically releasing it, because you might have to configure your application separately for a Linux environment, for a Windows environment, for a Mac environment. And then once you have basically released your software, you also need to maintain it, and for that you will basically monitor your software to ensure that your software is performing well, and there are no lag, there is no issue coming up when there is increased traffic on your system. And you also have to be able to maintain how is your software able to maintain, or how is it able to actually keep a track of the incoming traffic that is coming to the software. And of course, then in the actual development life cycle, once you have created your software, then you have to basically package and make it ready to get deployed and make it ready to be released, right? And then verify that whether yes, your software is actually working correctly or not. So as you can see that both the development and the operations, they go very hand in hand together, right? It's not just that development is a separate process and the operation side is a separate process. So from a development, we are more focused towards requirement gathering, designing and developing our software and testing our software. And in the operation side, we are managing our we are basically packaging our software, releasing it, deploying it, and ensuring that the software that we release, it is performing smoothly. And if there are any incoming issues that might be released, might be announced, we're able to monitor the performance of our softwares and ensure that they are working they're working correctly. So that is why the the intersection of the DevOps, it's very the development and the operations is very tightly bound. And the aim of the DevOps is to basically shorten the software development life cycle by delivering the features, fixes, and updates, which are very closely knit together with the software development approach. So basically, this consists of two main aspects, and which are the and you'll basically also hear the terms, different terms, and we'll basically come to the DevOps roadmap a bit later. But before that, we'll just take a bit amount of time to also cover what is continuous integration and continuous deployment, because whenever we talk about the DevOps lifecycle, there are basically a number of things that are happening over here, right? So the first thing that we'll basically talk about is the continuous deployment or the continuous development, right? Now, within the continuous development, we have primarily two different things, which is the continuous testing, and we have continuous integration. So when we talk about the continuous testing, testing is a very important aspect of any software that we develop, right? So whether it comes to creating some software that is a personal software, or of course a software that might be being released by MNC. So testing is very important, because we need to test whether the software that we are developing whether it has any bugs. And a lot of times what might happen is that if we are making some new changes in our product, we need to ensure that other aspects or the other parts of our software have not been affected. So basically, there are a number of different automation testing tools. There are a number of different tools that allow you to basically automate this entire process of testing your application. So this is what you call as the continuous testing. And with the continuous testing, we also have the continuous integration. Now, basically, the continuous integration is that it's, and again, within the entire DevOps lifecycle, the continuous integration is an extremely important stage within the entire DevOps lifecycle. And in this stage, basically, the developers are required to. So once they have, let's say, made some changes in their code base, they also, of course, need to push those changes, right? So that those changes can also be accessible by others in the working environment. So it's a in this particular stage, the developers are required to commit their changes to the source code, right? And basically the idea is that once we basically push this code, we need to go ahead and do code review, we need to test our code, we need to basically build our code, right? We need to package it together, right? So basically you write some software code. Of course, you cannot just go ahead and make this particular code file. Let's say I've written a Python file today, and you say that I will make this into an application. So you have to basically package your application. You have to build your application. That's like the process through which actual softwares are then utilized by the end users. They are not going to be using a Python script that you have written and directly use it, right? They have to basically use the packaged code, and that's what the end application is. What is being used by the people, right, who end up using your application. So this continuous integration part of making sure that your code is pushed and then doing the code review, testing, and building your project so that it can be used is very important. And the other aspect of the other aspect of our DevOps lifecycle is basically the continuous deployment. This is where our code, once it has been packaged, right, you have written your code, it has been tested, it has been built, it has been packaged. Now is the time that it will get deployed, and it will get deployed to a server which will be somewhere remote. And then of course, you'll be configuring it so that now people can actually start using. They can download your software, or if it's a website, web application, it's an app, Android app, iOS app, cross platform app, so people can actually start using it, right? So that's where that's the stage, right? The continuous deployment is the stage where the code is being deployed to your production servers, and you're doing some configuration management in order to ensure that it gets properly deployed. And or there are different tools that can be used alongside it, right? So that's where basically we talk about the continuous deployment. And this is how basically it kind of looks like. So we usually talk about the continuous integration and continuous deployment as two different parts of the entire DevOps lifecycle. So continuous integration is basically once you push your code, you build it, you test it, and you package it together. And then when it comes to deployment, and especially let's say if you're working in a large company, you don't just simply go ahead and push your code into production. You might have a development environment, you might have a staging environment, and you might have a production environment. So once a software developer, they write some code, your code first is run inside of a development environment. This development environment is just part of the internal development team. It is not made accessible to the end users. Now once you have tested your code and it works fine, you're content, you're satisfied that your code is working perfectly in your inside of your development environment, then you'll move it to staging, where it will go another set of round of testing. And once it's fine, then it'll go into production. And when it goes into production, that's when your software is actually out to be used by any regular users, right? So that's the entire aspect of the CI/CD. And this is how basically it kind of looks like as well. So you see that at the source, when a software is software developer is writing some code, they're pushing their code, it gets compiled, then we test it, then we go ahead and deploy it. So basically that's the the life cycle of the DevOps. And then of course, if we talk about the DevOps roadmap, so of course, I mean, it's there are a lot of different things that you have to learn when it comes to DevOps, right? There are a number of different prerequisites that you need to know that will help you actually become a good DevOps software, right? A good DevOps engineer. And today, as I mentioned, that there are so many opportunities in this entire software development world, that there are dedicated roles that require you to have DevOps. There are DevOps engineer roles, DevOps intern roles. And even if you are not a DevOps engineer per se, there are certain aspects of DevOps that you'll still be using in your software development journey also. If you're just a software developer, there are things such as deployment, testing, software deployment, that are now required. So if you, let's say, aspire to become a full stack engineer or a backend engineer, you'll still require to know some tools such as Docker, Kubernetes, which certain companies which not might not have a dedicated DevOps engineer might be required to be done by the backend engineers. So DevOps in itself is very important, especially if you're getting into or venturing into the software development, into the software development world. And this is the roadmap of and I'll start sharing my screen for the roadmap. So this is the website that I'll share with everyone, and we'll also share it in the chat with everyone. So this basically is the roadmap for DevOps, in case you want to get into DevOps. Now primarily, before we jump into the core concepts of DevOps, there are some things that you do require to know, right? So starting with the programming language, it could be any programming language, Python, Golang, R, Rust, or whatever you want to learn, right? But there are certain core computer science concepts that are also required, right? And these include computer networking, computer operating systems, right? And then basically your standard Linux operating system, like how basically Linux basically works, right? So these are important because within the DevOps, right, there are so many different types of things that are happening, right? So for example, you need to know about networking, know about standard operating system concepts, and learn about standard like Linux systems, because Linux systems are also very important, right? So you need to know about all of those. Now once you have basically learned all of those, right, you start to basically learn about what are virtual machines, then what are containers. You learn about container technologies like Docker, and then you learn about container orchestration technologies like Kubernetes. And then you can venture into other different type of tools. You can venture more deeply into CI/CD, right, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment. You can venture into infrastructure as code, which basically helps to provision servers, provision software. You can move more dedicatedly into the computer networking aspect of things with service meshes, right? So as you see, there are a number of different things that basically are done apart from the CI/CD. So if we just basically break it down into the major components within the DevOps, right? You have, of course, I mean, something that you'll require knowledge across any domain that you venture into DevOps. So your standard computer operating systems, computer networks, then basics of your Linux operating system, Linux commands. These are universal. That if you want to be a good DevOps engineer, these are some things that you'll definitely need, right? You'll definitely need a good understanding of how these work. Now, you within DevOps, you can venture into CI/CD, right? You can either venture into the container technologies like Docker, Kubernetes, and then if you want to move into monitoring, because monitoring is that once your software has been released into production, you need to ensure that it works correctly, right? It works well. So you have software monitoring coming into the picture. So you can venture into monitoring. You can venture into service mesh that helps us to basically work with softwares which have multiple services, and we need to communicate between them in a well to understand manner. So that also requires you to have good understanding of computer networking. But basically the main idea is that why are we covering all of this today is that we recently announced a JavaScript course, right? So on our Scalar community YouTube channel, we recently announced a YouTube series, or basically an entire course on JavaScript. So similarly, today we are announcing a course on DevOps. So in this entire a DevOps course, we'll be releasing a number of videos on this YouTube channel, where we'll be starting from DevOps from scratch. So starting with what is DevOps, that we have already covered today. So what is DevOps? What is CI/CD? We'll be taking some examples of how you can set up CI/CD with GitHub Actions, and we'll be taking up some projects how to set it up for a Node project, Django project. Then we'll move to containers, Docker, Kubernetes, right? We'll venture into dedicated cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP. That's a Google Cloud Platform. And of course, so these will be some deep dive sessions that will be released on YouTube. But of course, we'll have dedicated presence on our Scalar Discord as well. So in case you are having any questions related to DevOps, you can ask your questions there. And of course, we'll be conducting regular sessions on DevOps. And so in case all of you are interested to understand what is DevOps, you will be able to do that. So we are going to be releasing the videos will be coming up very shortly, probably starting from next week. We'll be releasing new videos every week regarding DevOps. And in case there are certain topics that all of you might want to be covered in the entire DevOps lifecycle, then we can basically also cover that. So that's basically the announcement regarding the DevOps. So in case you are interested to at least look at DevOps, if you are already very motivated to contribute to DevOps, and be able to start with DevOps, then definitely let us know, and do subscribe to the YouTube channel and stay alert on the actual Discord, because we'll be announcing new videos whenever they get released on the YouTube channel. And again, it's again free of cost. It's mainly for helping all all the developers who are there on this scalar Discord to be aware of DevOps, and what are the what are the benefits of being able to be you to be there to learn DevOps. What are the benefits? What are the career opportunities, right? So all those will be covered. And of course, in terms of the career opportunities, there is no dearth of opportunities, because there are fresher DevOps engineer roles like interns. So it's very good to be currently in this role, right? So I hope that everyone is able to understand this aspect. And now we can also take up questions by everyone. And in case you have any specific questions, please do let me know related to this DevOps course that we have announced, or related to DevOps, related to job opportunities, related to the life cycle, or to the or related to the roadmap. So please make sure to ask your questions. I already see that there are some questions in the in the chat, and we'll be taking up them one by one. All right. So the first question is by K. Akhilesh, who's asking, can you tell what is the challenge which is going to be announced for Scalar Discord? So I'm not aware of any particular challenge, but as mentioned that we are going to be releasing an entire dedicated course on Discord, on our uh, YouTube channel for our Scalar Discord community, and we'll be very active on our Scalar Discord as well, to help folks who are just getting started with DevOps, or who are interested to get started with DevOps. So I hope that answers your question, Akhilesh. Then we have test dummy. Does DevOps Lifecycle have some specific KPIs? In case you're talking about whenever we talk about DevOps Lifecycle, right? There are two main aspects: the continuous integration and continuous deployment. Now, if you were to measure the success of each and every step that is involved in this, right? So starting with pushing our code, right? So we need to ensure that the code that we're pushing, it's done in a proper manner. So that's where the git basically comes in the picture. In case there is any error, then it will be scraped, right? So at any step during the entire DevOps lifecycle, you need to be aware of certain metrics that need to be kept in mind. So, for example, if you are doing software testing, right, you have to be able to do software testing in such a way that you do not require multiple rounds of testing, right? Within one round, we're able to get a lot of different issues, right? So, I hope that basically answers the question. Test dummy again, in case you if it doesn't answer your question, then feel free to elaborate a bit more. I hope that answers. Then K. Akhilesh is asking, is GitHub involved in DevOps? So GitHub is very, very heavily involved with DevOps. GitHub has its own internal CI/CD tool, which is known as the GitHub Actions, and we'll have dedicated sessions on GitHub Actions as well coming up. I think we have already covered one of these sessions on GitHub Actions before on our YouTube channel. One of the first videos that we covered on DevOps and CI/CD. So make sure to watch that particular video. We covered that last year. We definitely GitHub is very deeply involved with DevOps, and any for that matter, most of the companies, most of the large companies have dedicated DevOps DevOps functions in their companies. And even today, a lot of new startups are also having dedicated DevOps engineers or DevOps functions in their companies. I hope that answers your question, Akhilesh. In case there are any further questions, feel free to ask them in the YouTube. And of course, I'll be there post this session on Discord, so you can always connect with me on the Scalar Discord as well to ask your questions. But in case anyone is asking, okay, so Akhilesh is asking another question: how much it will take to become DevOps engineer? In terms of the required skills, as I mentioned, that the primary skills that you require are the core computer science fundamentals. That means learning at least one programming language, and then the most important aspiration, the most important aspects of the DevOps engineer is like learning the core concepts of your computer science, such as like the DevOps, right? Sorry, the most important aspects, right? So things like the computer networks, operating systems, then Linux commands, Linux distro, all of those like are super important. So you need to learn them, and then of course you'll move towards the next step, like things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, and take a look at all of these. And then of course moving into containers, Docker, Kubernetes. Like there are so many different things that are there to become a what which are involved to become a DevOps engineer. But your starting goal should be to master all these different comments, and this particular to be able to do all of that, and then be able to, like, let's say, go ahead and learn the different type of things that you can with this. So I hope this answered your question, Akhilesh. Any other questions by anyone? All right. So Arnav is saying that I'm beginner to the DevOps concept. Is it necessary or important for an Android or web developer to know DevOps? So that's a really good question, Arnav. So see, I mean, probably a few years ago, DevOps used to be a completely separate concept and a completely separate domain in the entire software development life cycle. And that's what we're trying to just help bridge that gap between the core software development and the DevOps, right? And make the development and the operations that's basically releasing a software more tightly bound, so that the release engineers, the maintainers, they're able to very easily understand the development process as well. So as a beginner, you should still be aware of what exactly is DevOps, because let's say if you are a beginner, you might work in a company where there might be DevOps engineers, or there might be such kind of engineers, right? And when there are DevOps engineers, will be interacting with them. So just having basic understanding of what DevOps is should be prerequisite for everyone. Now when it comes to let's say an Android developer or a web developer requiring to know whether there's something like DevOps, in order to do that, so basically what we'll be doing is that when it comes to a web developer, right, especially if it's a full stack developer, then within DevOps, the entire this DevOps lifecycle for a web developer, right? DevOps is also important, especially if you are maintaining or developing your application, right? So if you're developing your application, then basically what will happen is that if you're developing the application, then you'll have to also test it, deploy it, right? And all of this will be done. So basically, in the case of a web developer, yes, there are certain situations where there might be something that is needed, right? So that's basically the web developer role, right? Web developer role. And in even so basically for more DevOps, it will be more related to backend engineer that might be required. And when it comes to let's say the Android developer, also for mobile development, also it's the same person, right? So or the same set of skills that might be required in case you want to deploy your application. You want to know the metrics of your application. That, let's say you're writing the backend for your cat, right? Or basically you're writing the backend for your Android app or for your web app. So for that backend, you will require the DevOps piece. But again, it depends from company to company. But it's completely fine to just start learning and understand how this works. So I hope that answers my question, your question, enough. Uh, I'm more than happy to take up any other questions at this point of time. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Any other questions by anyone? Again, just to kind of repeat that we are officially going to be launching an entire course or entire series on DevOps. So we'll be covering things like CI/CD, Docker, Kubernetes, containers, right? A number of different sessions on cloud systems, cloud providers. So in case you have any questions related to it, feel free to ask it right now, or you can also ask them inside the Scalar Discord. And stay tuned for the sessions, as they will most likely start from next week.